Today is the 13th of September 2006, and this is Rosamond King here with Abdou Mbye, Chief Librarian and Head of the National Library of the Gambia. All right. So why don't we start with talking a little bit about the history of the National Library?
Okay, the National Library had its origins to the former British Council Library. This was established in 1946, just after World War II, by the British, who were then located on Independence Drive, and the library was housed in a bungalow, converted bungalow. It's the building that houses the National Council for Arts and Culture, okay, National Museum right now. All right, the library, okay, was well developed when it was first established, but after some time, it started to crumble. The building itself started to crumble. The stock that we had, diminished. It went to a stage where the first chief librarian had to write to her friends. The first chief librarian then was Mrs. Mbye. She had to write to her friends in the UK to come to the aid of the National Library, of the then British Council Library, which started to fall apart. In 1962, the British Council, for reasons of economy, then I think they were going through economic hardships, had to close. And when they closed, they handed over to the government of the Gambia. The National Library was then a part of the then Department of Education. Right, so the library was then under the Director of Education. That was in 1963 when they actually took over. But like things are, the Department of Education then was more concerned, with its schools and teachers, and library services had to at least be relegated to the background. The situation, continued to deteriorate, and the British Council had to come in again. And in 1976, they helped through the Overseas Development Administration to build a new purpose-built library, and that is the one that we are in here. So we came over to this library in 1976. That was when we became the Gambia National Library, as opposed to the British Council Library Service. We were established by an Act of Parliament known as the Gambia Library Board Act of 1976. We are basically combining now the functions of a national library and that of a public library service, in the sense that as a public library, which we are much more into, we provide, the services that public libraries offer in terms of lending service to adults. We provide services to children. We have a reference library department. As a public library service as well, we try to extend the services we are providing to the rural folks. Okay, we started mainly with mobile library services that took the libraries to the provinces. We also had 2 branch libraries. The first one was located in Brikama at the Regional Education Services. Later on, through funding from the Canadians, we were able to build our first purpose-built branch library in Brikama. It's adjacent to the commissioner's office. The other branch library we had was in Basse, Upper River Division. We were then located at the Regional Education Services. But around 1993, we were evicted, by the then principal education officer at the regional office, who said that maybe they wanted to use the room that we were using to house their own regional resource center. So we are now functioning, as a national public library with a branch in only one part of the country, that is in Brikama. Like I said, we combine the functions of a national library with that of a public library. We also have a national library division attached to the library, and we try to provide at least most of the services expected of a national library, in that we are empowered by the Legal Depository Act to acquire whatever material is being published in the Gambia, and it's about the Gambia or whatever. We are entitled to receive free copies, that is 2 copies of whatever is published, to be conserved, preserved for posterity. From these materials, we are required to produce the national bibliography of all materials that are deposited in the country. We also, as a national library, are obliged to look outside of the Gambia for whatever is being published about the Gambia or by Gambians, and acquire them either from purchase or exchange, and the like. We also keep records of government publications, like commissions of inquiries, like consultancy reports, whatever that deals with the Gambia, that has relevance to the Gambia, for at least preservation for maybe citizens of the next generation. So in that case, we can be a library of last resort. When researchers come into the country, at least they should expect to find what they cannot find anywhere else. If they come to the National Collection Department, they would be able to get the material. So we are basically a depository for Gambian literature. Try as much as possible to deposit Gambia. So that basically, in a nutshell, is a brief history of the National Library as it is today.
Okay. And how many subscribers does the library have?
Yeah, currently active subscribers, we have about 1,000 that use the library, that subscribe to the library, borrow books and the like. But again, they can, but access to the library, especially to the public, is free. But to borrow, to become members of library and borrow books, you said one has to at least be a recognized subscriber, a member of the library. That we have about 1,000.
Wonderful. And what is the population that uses the library the most, would you say?
It's mostly students. They constitute about 85%, and children constitute also the greater majority of it. But it's students of school-going age, and an increasing number of university students, many of whom really look up to the National Library as the de facto university library, and we cater for them, right? We make sure in our acquisitions and the like, and the services that we provide.
Yes, I was just at the university library, and I find that the National Library has significantly more resources.
Okay,
than the university library as well. Yeah. Um, what would you say are the most popular types of books that are used in the library?
That's right. The most popular type is basically fiction, and fiction, especially with African backgrounds. One talks about like the pace set, especially adapted, for African or West African, just African, teenagers and the like. And romances as well, especially for ladies. Many ladies, come in for romances and the like. But basically, books that they borrow most are really fiction books, especially African fiction. Yeah, African fiction.
So even though students are the majority of the people using the library, they're not necessarily using books for taking up books for their classes?
Indeed, indeed,
Oh,
indeed.
okay.
Yes, indeed, not necessarily.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. And how many librarians are on staff?
Unfortunately, as at now, there is only one trained librarian. Sad, we are an endangered species, and we are basically a training ground for organizations, in the Gambia, organizations that pay much better, because maybe librarians here, maybe receive, government salaries, and government salaries are generally, not very, very, very good. So they come here, get trained, and before long it's goodbye to the National Library. So unfortunately, there is only one trained librarian. So
And that would be you, yeah?
yes, yes.
And how did you become a librarian?
Interestingly, yes, by accident, because when I was going to school, I was very fond of reading. Then we had what was known as the British High Commission Information Center in Banjul, where I used to go a lot, to read newspapers. There was the American Embassy's cultural center in Banjul as well, which I used to attend, a lot. And it so happened that, when I left school, well, I was dying, to go to America, to get to America. But in the meanwhile, a friend of mine, maybe was just teasing me, like there was this advert in the newspaper for a library assistant and the like. Just said to me, well, you the bookman, there is an advertisement, for a position of library assistant or whatever. So that was how I saw it, and applied for it. Although I really meant to at least be on the job for a short while, while I was trying to find my way to the United States, but somehow or the other I got hooked, I was offered quick training, within 2 years or so, like I was given training, to Nigerian university. Then I said, well, wow, why not take the easier route rather than going to the United States, try to find my way, hustle and whatever. Here I'm being paid my salary and given allowances and study freely. So that was, how I stayed on, into the job. But basically, like I wanted to become a lawyer, but eventually that was maybe what really happened. It was the accident, by accident. So, and I'm still on it. Right? Yeah,
Okay.
still hooked on to the job of librarian.
And would you say there's another generation coming up who are interested in becoming librarians?
Specifically, I am not. Maybe we need to campaign a little bit more. We have a library association, perhaps, that need to perhaps go out more, perhaps, into the schools and really talk about librarianship, as a career, because I see a lot of people, like even teachers, for instance, and people who come in here. We were even able, because of the shortage of librarians, as starters, we were able to head hunt for a graduate. Somebody was a graduate in French, because he was also looking for a job, and then we head hunted him. He came into the library, maybe with a little bit, very little expectations. but got hooked because he did not imagine, like, the range of possibilities, what librarianship really involves. I think people maybe need to be sensitized more into what librarianship is about. Like, it is much more than just stamping and receiving of books, but it's basically, about information provision, processing of information, and the like. So people are really not aware as to what potentialities there are in librarianship. So you hardly, ever find anybody, like, from the school or whatever, saying, well, this is what I want to become, a librarian. You are either attracted to it, as a job or whatever, and then get training on it. Yeah. So basically, is what it is. We need to market the profession a bit more. There was a time, yes, when we did a little bit of that, when I was interviewed by the television, by GRTS, I was impressed, with the reaction of the people. They really did not know what this is all about, and this is what we are doing. Since then, we had lots of people coming in, like, got a wealth of resources, what we can do. Yeah.
And because this is the National Library, I assume that most of the support, financial support, comes from the government?
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, okay. Right. And I want to ask you, since you have all of these books on Gambian literature, some questions specifically about the literature. And the first is a question that comes up among the critics all the time, which is, do you believe that a Gambian national literature exists?
Yes, I do believe that it exists, yes. And it is developing, especially it's being nurtured, especially by young people. It does exist. Especially, I think, maybe it really started in earnest with authors like Diba, because they do have, like, the backgrounds that are portrayed really in his writings, all have Gambian backgrounds, like the Nana Gray Johnsons and, like Baba Silla, They are really, budding, Gambian writers who are much into writing Gambian literature.
And who would you say, I think there is some controversy here as well, who would you say is the first Gambian writer?
I would Len Repeaters to me. Len Repeaters is the first Gambian writer.
And would you consider William Compton Gambian or not?
Not definitely, definitely not. Maybe it was just his birth was just an accident of history. He was born here, but I don't think that he has identified himself as a Gambian.